Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Japanese-style rolled omelet. That's right, to make perfect Tamagoyaki, you need a special pan and many years of experience. But even a not perfect one, made in a regular pan, is still amazing. And out of all the online chefs, who better to show you how to make something not perfect than me? So with that, let's go ahead and get started with 4 large eggs, which we've cracked into a mixing bowl. And then to these we will add a splash of cold fresh water, which in some versions is actually dashi. And then we'll also be adding a little bit of soy sauce, plus something called mirin, which is basically a sweet Japanese cooking wine. And yes, you can find it at the store. It's right next to the soy sauces and rice vinegars. But anyway, after we add a little bit of that, we will season this with a touch of salt, a little bit of white sugar, and then last but not least, a couple shakes of cayenne. And by the way, the traditional version of this is very sweet. Right, for 4 eggs, you'll see people put in like a tablespoon of sugar. So I've significantly reduced the amount to what I find pleasing in my palate. But of course, you will adjust that to your taste. And then what we'll do once we have everything in the bowl is take a fork, and we will pierce those eggs right in the yolks, and then we'll beat these until the whites are fully incorporated. Although I should mention many versions don't have you beat the eggs as much as I do. And in the final omelet, you can actually see little pieces of the white, which visually I do not enjoy. I find that distracting and disconcerting, so I don't want to overbeat, but I do want the whites completely mixed in. And once that's been accomplished, to make things easier at the stove, we'll go ahead and transfer that into some kind of portable measuring cup, or something similar, at which point we can head to our nonstick skillet, which I have set over medium heat. And before we add our first addition of egg, we'll brush the bottom with some oil, which for a lot of people is pure sesame oil, but I find that can be sometimes a little bit overpowering. So I do 1 part sesame to 3 parts vegetable oil, which seems to work out nicely for me. And then what we'll do is carefully pour in 1/3 of our egg mixture, and we will tip and move the pan around until it evenly covers the bottom. And then once we've done that, we are simply going to wait for this egg mixture to cook enough so that it will hold together as we roll it up. Oh, and the reason we put 1/3 of our eggs in is because we're going to do this 3 times, which I would say is the minimum amount of times. Okay, if you're really good at these and you're using the right pan, you can do like 4 or 5 rolls, which gives you a lot of extra layers. But trust me, this is amazing just with 3 rolls, as I hope you find out. But anyway, what we'll do when our eggs are about halfway set is take a spatula and kind of push the eggs in from the side, just so when we roll this up, we have a little more of a uniform thickness. And one of the challenges here is square spatulas and round pans don't often make that easy. Which, by the way, is why you're going to see me switch to a silicone spatula at certain points, since those are flexible and a little easier to maneuver. And once in a while, I'll reduce the heat down to medium-low, so the egg's not cooking too much as we're doing these maneuvers. And then I'll turn it back up later once we add more egg. But anyway, once we have those 3 sides kind of squared off, I'm going to go back to the spatula and attempt to roll this up into something like a 2-inch wide rectangle. And because we're using relatively low heat, and the egg is still pretty soft and flexible, it's not going to be that hard to make some minor adjustments. And then what we'll do once we have achieved something close to this shape is slide it to the edge of the pan so it's about 1/3 of the way in. Oh, and if we have little pieces of egg to break off, you can just kind of tuck them in and under the roll. Or if you think they're going to brown and look weird, you could use a paper towel and kind of wipe them out like I did here. But in hindsight, we probably don't have to do anything. We can just go ahead and apply a little more oil, and then pour our second third of the egg mixture into the pan on both sides of that rolled omelet we just made. And as I mentioned, if I turn the heat down, I do like to turn it back to medium when we add the egg. And then once that's in, kind of an important step before it sets, we want to lift our already made egg roll up so some of that egg flows underneath, which is going to help everything stay together and theoretically make this a little easier to roll. And then we are basically going to repeat that first step exactly as we just did, except this time we have a small omelet in the pan. But basically all the moves are the same. And just like after the first addition, once the egg mixture was distributed and starting to set, I reduced the heat to medium-low so our egg doesn't cook too fast. So above and beyond repeating the physical moves I'm showing you, you're going to have to keep an eye on things and adjust the heat up and down as needed. I mean, you are, after all, the gaijin of what you're seeing. And that's it. Once our eggs are set enough to start moving, I like to flip that short side up over the omelet, before we grab our spatula and attempt to roll this up. And on these second and third rolls, I don't worry too much about squaring off the sides. And you'll see why when we get to the final shaping. But anyway, we'll go ahead and fold that up. And if you go too far, just readjust like I just did. And once we do get that back to sort of the original shape, we will slide it over in the pan just like last time. And speaking of the last time, for the last time, at least for this omelet, we will brush the pan with oil, and we'll pour in the last of the egg mixture, and we'll do everything we just did. And in case you're wondering, the traditional pan for this is a rectangular shape, which usually comes with a spatula that's shaped like a putty knife, and it's the same width as the pan, which makes it a lot easier to roll your omelet up and keep a nice uniform shape. And if you end up enjoying this and are going to make these on a regular basis, I'd probably recommend you get one, since it is a lot easier. But as this video hopefully proves, even using a round pan, with a few special tricks and some lowered expectations, we are still going to produce something absolutely incredible. Oh, and if you're wondering about fillings, you could, if you want, add any and all things you'd add to a regular omelet, but you're going to want to make sure everything's diced really small, and that everything's already cooked and tender and ready to eat, since you're just not going to have enough heat here to cook anything that's raw. But if you did have some diced up pepper and onions, maybe with a little bit of diced ham, you could sprinkle that onto your half-cooked egg before you roll it up. But personally, just like a classic French omelet, I do prefer mine plain. And if I want to eat other things, I'll put that on the side. But anyway, whether we add things or not, once that last addition of the egg mixture is half set, we'll go ahead and fold/roll this up for the last time. And the reason we want to do this before the eggs are fully set is because once rolled up, all that heat is trapped, and those eggs continue to keep cooking. And if we cooked everything fully set before we did this, the final product would be much drier than we want. Okay, the magic of a Japanese-style omelet, besides the great flavor, are lots of layers of tender, moist egg. So basically, we just want the eggs set enough so that we can roll this and they hold their shape without everything falling apart like scrambled eggs. And yes, this last roll is going to be the hardest, since that thing we're rolling up is now a lot bigger. But don't worry if it breaks. Just put it back together the best you can. And no matter how you need to manipulate it, or which tools you need to do that, as long as you can somehow fold this up into some kind of uniform shape, everything's going to be fine because of this next and most important move. And that would be to pull it off the heat and transfer it onto a piece of plastic wrap. And we will fold some over the top. And while we roll this up and eventually tuck in the sides, we are actually able to do some final shaping. Since again, hopefully our eggs are still relatively soft. And then once we do have that arranged into a nice neat package, I like to wrap it in a kitchen towel, just so everything stays nice and hot. And what we'll do is let that sit there for about 5 minutes. Although believe it or not, you can go like 10 or 15 minutes and it will still be warm. And somewhere between warm and hot is how I prefer to eat this. But in case it matters, you should know that a lot of people do eat these cold or at room temperature. So it really is very versatile in that regard. But like I said, I like to go 5 minutes before I unwrap and slice it up. And as you can see, it's still nice and steamy and relatively hot. And then what I usually do is slice off the ends. And that's because by using a round pan, the ends are going to be a little bit thinner than the middle. So we'll cut those and eat those as a very special chef snack. And if you've never tasted this before, you're in for a huge treat. But we'll get to that. First, let me go ahead and cut this up, which we could do into 6 pieces, or maybe 8. No, let's go with 6. And of course, once that's portioned, if you realize one of the pieces is off, you will have no choice but to do a little more trimming, and maybe enjoy one more chef snack. And that's it, let's go ahead and flip some of these up on their side, so you can see all those amazing layers we created, which not to brag, but for using a round pan and having very little experience, we've achieved something very, very close to the original. But let's not admire our work for too long, since like I said, I do like to eat this warm. So we'll go ahead and plate that up. And this is usually served with some grated daikon radish. But I didn't have daikon, although I did have a regular radish, which I decoratively cut and stained with soy. And by decoratively cut, I simply sliced one way and then turned it and sliced the other. And then for a final touch, I like to sprinkle on a little bit of furikake, which is basically toasted sesame seeds and seaweed, and sometimes bonito flake and chili flake. And that's going to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of extra seasoning. And that's it. I grabbed some leftover takeout chopsticks and went in for the official bite. And that, my friends, might just very well be the best omelet. Sorry, France. But thanks to that gentle cooking and all that rolling, we've achieved something that has a very similar texture to a classic French omelet, which also has a bunch of folded up layers if done correctly. And besides being very moist and incredibly tender, thanks to those ingredients we beat into the eggs, this is just a little more flavorful and a little more savory than a regular classic omelet most of us are used to. Oh, and this might sound like a joke, but it's not. This definitely tastes better eaten with chopsticks than with a fork. Alright, I can't explain that, but it does. And yes, thanks to the mirin and that sugar we added, this does have a little bit of sweetness to it, but I think that's balanced beautifully with the savory and salty flavors. So to summarize, this feels amazing, looks amazing, and tastes amazing. Which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.